What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Off Panel Off Topic YouTube channel. Anyway, I'm not great at intros for this, I guess. Jake here, and I mentioned about doing this separately from the show, mostly because I know that usually when we do reviews, it's usually from an aspect of Tyler knowing a little bit something about it, me knowing something about it, or us both seeing it, and given the case that he hasn't watched the show, and I don't think he intends to or really cares about it, I figured I'd talk about it anyway. So let's talk about Halo, at least the first 2 episodes. That's what I have watched. Boy, I have some thoughts about Halo. Let's just get it right out of the gate. I think a lot of people have said this online, and I kind of agree with this sentiment. I'm still trying to figure out who exactly this show is for. Because on one hand, like in the first episode, there's moments, even for me as a casual player of the game, not somebody who's really into the lore, but there were just moments in that first episode that really excited me. But there were so many questions I had, especially coming out of the second episode, because I think the second episode is the most bold in terms of what they're trying to do to make the show different than the games, but also manages to retain things that made the lore of the game so interesting. And I'm really confused on what they're going to do this whole season. So let's go episode by episode. So first episode, I think, was a great introduction to the series in terms of its tone, with its violence. I think that the Covenant surprisingly look really good, especially for a TV show. I was amazed at how well the character models look, and I'm assuming that that's where the majority of that $10 million per episode budget went to, was the Covenant characters, and they looked great. I'm not taking that away from the show. I think those were great, awesome, and I just loved how visceral they made the assault feel. So it opens with these group of insurgents, or these rebels, whatever you want to call them, on a base, and then we see the I think her name's Quan. That character, her with her friends, and then she sees what looks like the Covenant show up, and she's like, "Oh shit, we need to get back to base." So they run back to base. The Covenant have already showed up. The elites are there, and they're tearing shit up. And again, the elites look great. It's funny because we just talked about this on the podcast about Moon Knight, and how there's a sequence in Moon Knight where you can clearly tell there's some CG, and I talked about, how great Thanos looks in Infinity War and Endgame, and then you look at how good the Covenant look in this, and it's truly remarkable of where we are, where we can actually make believable, livable CG characters, and I think that's incredible, especially for this series, because you're going to need that, because the enemy is, alien beings that I'm really impressed with that. And I love that whole sequence, and it was really cool. I just wish, this is what I mean, where I'm like, who is this for? And for me, there are moments of when we first see the Spartans. We see Silver Team, who I don't know. I get that this is like the Silver timeline, that the TV show is not canon with the games, but like, why not just name it Blue Team? Because Master Chief's team's name is Blue Team, but instead in this, it's Silver Team. And it's like, again, another change that I thought was a little weird to make right out of the gate, but nonetheless, here we are. But regardless, them showing up was still cool. Like, I really like that, but I feel like, again, there's some little missed opportunities. I don't understand. Like, I do love it when a lot of the times when you have an adaptation, show some restraint and not give something right away. But in this case, when you have Halo, one of the most iconic soundtracks from a video game, that is like, when you hear that, the operatic, like, monk of like, oh, and you like, dun, 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 boom, 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 and like the guitar kicks in and the drums. Why not have that the first time you see Master Chief in this show? Why not do that? Because his intro is cool, but it doesn't, have that same punch with this score. And there's nothing against the score of the show. I'm just saying that, like, that particular moment really would have benefited from the Halo theme kicking in when he just drops down and beats the shit out of these elites. Like, that's something that fans would want to see. And it goes back to, who is this show for? Because you can still appeal to the hardcore Halo fans, but also make it accessible to a mainstream audience. It's very... And you know, we talked about this with you know, leading into the show and the controversies going into it, and it's like, I understand that Paramount and essentially Microsoft want to get to an audience that has never played Halo or doesn't know what Halo is, and maybe get them interested, and then maybe they'll be, you know, pick up the Master Chief Collection or Halo Infinite or whatever, and you could do that. It's very doable, but it's just, there's just sometimes that I'm like, you can clearly tell they were going for a mainstream audience with this, and I don't think that they really been going for the fans, at least what I've seen in the first 2 episodes. Now, that being said, it's not terrible. Like I said, the action in this first episode is so damn good. Like, when Chief and Silver Team drop down and they're killing the elites, it's fun, it's awesome, and then there's a really cool moment where Chief's getting hit, and you don't really see it in the games because it's first person, but like to see, like, when he gets shot and to see the bullets like hit the shield and see the CG of the shield depleting, that's cool. And then when it makes the sound that you always hear when you're one shot in the multiplayer, you know, or the single player, I guess, but I always think of the multiplayer. But when he gets down to like where his shields are down, and then to have that sound effect, and then to have the when his shield goes back up again. Why not incorporate the theme into this? Because there's these little tidbits, these little things, these little Easter eggs for the game, for the people that have played Halo and enjoy it, but it's just like they just can't commit to going full into Halo. And I've said this 1,000 times ad nauseum with this show. I'm not big on the Halo lore, so I don't mind if they do something different and they... try and tell. It's an adaptation. That's what an adaptation is supposed to be. If I wanted the same story from the games, I would just play the friggin' games, right? So I understand there has to be changes, but it's so bizarre. So then Chief, he goes into a cave. There's some jokes about the cave line, that it's not. There's like the cave formation is weird or something like that. Apparently that's an Easter egg to the first game. Whatever. Chief finds an artifact that like triggers some what seems to be memories of him as a kid. And if anybody that follows the Halo lore, which is funny because my wife, she watched the first episode, parts of it with me, and so there were times that I had to kind of explain the lore, and it's again challenging for someone who's not, you know, read any of the expanded stuff or really care that much about the single player stuff. Sorry, I bumped the camera. It was fun to do some things like that, but overall, I feel like there's so many missed opportunities in what they're trying to do, because I know what they're doing they're trying to develop that John is a person and Master Chief is a person, and I think they go out of their way doing it by calling him 117, calling him John, and yes, they've done that in the games, but they don't say Master Chief as much as you would think, because in the games it's Chief or Master Chief. It's usually never John or 117 as much. It makes more sense for Halsey to do it, but whatever. So we get a little bit of backstory on John and see that he did have a family. And again, if you know the lore of the Spartans, these are kids that were essentially kidnapped by the UNSC and, you know, turned into Spartans, which are super soldiers that are used to fight the Covenant and save humanity or whatever. So we get a little bit of backstory on him, and then the rest of the episode, it's a little bit more world building, not as much action. We get to see Halsey, we get to see like the inner workings of the UNSC and then the insurgency. And what I do like about the show is it does touch on the fact that UNSC aren't necessarily the good guys, and it's kind of, and this is, I do like this when you see more shows be a little bit, and I think maybe because I just recently watched Starship Troopers again, but it's nice to see these sci-fi things that have this action, have all this cool shit in it, and the Space Marines, and the with Halo being iconic with the fighting the Covenant and everything like that, it does kind of go out of its way to explain that like the UNSC aren't necessarily perfect. I mean, they did kidnap kids and turn them into Spartans, so a little bit messy, and I think they touch more on that in episode 2. But we get to build the relationship with Halsey, and Chief tells her about the artifact, and they're trying to figure out what it is. And we get on he takes Quan back. He tells the Silver Team to go back to base. He's going to try tell Halsey more about this artifact, and then he'll bring Quan back to base because she followed the Spartans into the cave, and then there was one elite that got away that was hiding and ran away from them. And then I gotta quit messing with my hair. This is why I hate doing videos sometimes. I always look at my hair. That's why I wear a hat. Don't want to do my hair. And it is what it is. I mean, what I remember most from that first episode is the first scene and then the ending of it. But so as they're on the ship back to the UNSC, she keeps talking about like everybody talks about you, because at this point Master Chief is used as propaganda for the war effort, and apparently he killed Quan. I hope her name is Quan. I hope I remember that correctly. He killed her family, killed her parents, killed her mom. And there's also this other dude. I can't even remember his name. He's some guy that I've seen. He's a villain in Game of Thrones, and he just looks creepy. I should have looked this up. I did this the same way with Our Flag Means Death. I thought I remembered names, but then I didn't. But regardless, the whole it looks like the general conflict of the show is Chief finding out who he really is, the UNSC trying to control him, the UNSC fighting with the revolution and the insurgents that don't like the UNSC, and of course the broader war between the Covenant and humanity. So it seems like this show is going to be juggling a lot of different storylines, which is fine. It's an hour-long sci-fi drama, action drama. Of course, it's going to juggle a bunch of different storylines. But the thing that really took away from episode 1, after we had the conversation with Halsey, Chief knows they're going to kill Quan. So he sort of develops a situation where he's like, I don't want to kill her. I want to know more about myself. I don't think, maybe I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. And that is where I think there's a lot of conflict between fans of Halo and casual people, because this doesn't seem like something Chief would do, just flip on a dime like that. And I know that later down the road, that seems like what he's character doing. And I get it. It's not the traditional Master Chief. But again, it's just there's so many times where I'm looking at this show and I just see like, okay, well, it clearly wants to be in the Halo universe. There's some people that say like, oh, well, it feels like it was a different sci-fi show and they just slapped Halo on it to get name recognition and get people to view it. I could see that. I really could. But my personal thought is, why make it about Chief and just do a different Spartan and have him tell that story about him and trying to figure out him, and like you could still make that a compelling story out of that without Master Chief. The problem is they feel like I think the show feels like it has to be about Chief, other than the fact that the lore of Halo is like a lot of different franchises. There's some depth there, so you could do a different Spartan, and mostly because at the end of this first episode, he takes his helmet off. Because it's a very defiant thing. She has a battle rifle. Oh, by the way, the weapons look great, just like the games. The sound effects are just like the games. There's some things I really love about it. She points the gun at him, and he says, if you want to shoot me, you got to aim here. Takes his helmet off at his face. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. That's a fine moment to show his face. But why does it have to be Master Chief? Why not tell this story of a different Spartan? And do that. Because when we get to the second episode, he's not even in his armor pretty much the whole freaking episode, which I'm not one of those guys that bitches and moans when a character takes their helmet off. I understand Pablo Schreiber, you got this actor, it's a TV show, you know that actor is behind the mask or behind the helmet, why not show his face? It's not like the games where it's just Steve Down's voice. And I get that. But it also goes back to like what makes Chief so iconic is his armor. And yes, it's his personality as well. But when you think of Chief, you think of his armor, and he never takes it off. And then to divert that and have him take off all of his armor at one point, it's just like, I think I understand that they're trying to make him more human, but you can do that without just completely taking away everything. And I think they do a lot of cool building with him and Soren, who is played by Bovine. I can't think of his last name. I always call him not Dave Chappelle because I've always thought he was Dave Chappelle for a long time because they have a very similar sound. But it's just a running joke that it's like an inside joke, but it's Bovine something. He's a great actor. I'm sorry, but that's what I always think of when I think of him. Because for a while I thought that he looked similar to Dave Chappelle, but I was like, that's not Dave Chappelle. So that's why I was referring to him as not Dave Chappelle. I'm explaining this joke way too much. He is a character that is in Halo lore, that's in the books, that has been a friend of Chief. We see him at the beginning, in a flashback of the first episode where he's leaving because he's done with being a Spartan. He's done with the propaganda. He's not buying into the bullshit. John finds him has a gun on him, is going to kill him because he's like, hey, man, you broke protocol. This is what we do. And he's like, dude, we're friends. What the fuck? And like they have their whole discussion, and he lets him go. And then he shows up later, and he's living on this there's this group of people that like live on these asteroids, which I thought was kind of cool. So he shows Chief shows up with Quan because he is pissed off the UNSC at the end of the first episode, gone rogue, and he goes to find Soren and talks to Soren because he needs help figuring out what the hell this artifact is. Runs into Soren, meets him. Soren is kind of like this like roguish, like, I don't want to say Han Solo type because it sounds stupid, but yeah, he's like this space pirate rogue type. And he meets up with him and he tries to give him some information on it, and they have a chat. And again, it goes back to even now, all these years later, Chief is still buying into UNSC propaganda because he's talking about the pellet on him that like that all the Spartans have that kind of take away emotion and things like that and make them more, make them better soldiers. And Chief says it takes away distractions, and he goes, it makes you, a fucking robot, pretty much. So they have their discussion. We get the smiley face on his hand, which is, again, a nice little Easter egg to Halo. And again, that whole sequence, he's not in his armor. He's just in like the palette or whatever they call it. Like this just black jumpsuit is what it looks like. Again, why? He says, you could take your armor off. There's no enemies here. It's like, again, just leave him in the armor. You can still make him human and still humanize him without completely taking his armor off. And I know that sounds like such a nitpicky thing, but it goes back to what Tyler and I were talking about. If you're not going to make it canon and you're going to tell your own story, fine. But at this point, why are you calling it Halo? And why is he Master Chief? Just make him a separate Spartan. You could tell this story without him being Master Chief. I think, to me, that's what the most frustrating thing is. But maybe that'll change in episode 3, where we get, because at the end of this episode is all exposition. It's all backstory and world building, which is fine. I don't mind that because of all the action in that first episode. I really don't mind this being more, slowing it down, being more world building, because if I remember correctly, there's 8 episodes of this. So and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of killing. And Covenant, we're going to see a lot of Chief. I believe that. And I think he's going to be in his armor a lot more the rest of the season. But I just think the showing, having him take his helmet off and then have him completely out of the armor, like back to back like that, and for a long period of time, I don't know. It seems a little weird. I know that 343 released a statement justifying it and saying like, "Hey, TVs are much different than games and this, that, and this." Sure, but it just, I don't know, man. All of it in episode 2 seems strange. To take that away. But I do love how High Charity looked. That looks awesome. Again, the Covenant characters look fantastic. The CG is amazing on them. I really don't like that there's a human character that is like one of the chosen, and so she and Chief are like the only two that can activate this arc or this artifact. And I think that they're going to imply that those two are siblings, which is like, why? Why? Chief doesn't need to have a sister that, like, they're chosen ones and adding, like, this mythical aspect to it, and it's just like, come on, guys. What are we doing? That's what I mean. There's so many there's moments of that I like. There's moments that I can get behind. Like, I love the political aspect of the UNSC and High Charity and the Covenant and all that. And I like that we're getting a little bit more Chief's backstory with Soren, but it's like, dude, it just doesn't feel like that first episode. At least the first half of it, I would say, really felt like Halo to me. I understand how other people could disagree, and that's fine, but for me, that's what felt like Halo. But this second episode, the political stuff was good. I like that a lot, but I don't know. It seems strange. And I feel like some of the other Spartans are more like Chief than Chief himself. And that could change in the rest of the season. But right now, that's what it's looking like. But anyway, Halsey brings up to the UNSC that, like, hey, how can we control Chief? How can we get him to come back and control him if he just yeeted out of here with this fucking insurrectionist? Is their terms, not mine. But she's like, I got an idea. I have a solution. I have Cortana. So by the end of episode 2, we realize that, okay, now we're going to get Cortana, and it's going to be Chief and Cortana the rest of the season. I'm hoping that is what's going to make this more like Halo and feel more like Halo, is having Cortana in it. And I kind of like the idea that they don't introduce her right away and they slowly bring her in. But I don't know. Overall, and I know this has kind of been randomly and all over the place. I'll break it down like this. Things that I liked from the first 2 episodes. I love the action in the first episode. I love how the Covenant looks. I love how High Charity looks. I can't think of her name, but I like the actress who plays Halsey. I like Pablo Schreiber as Chief. I just wish he'd be wearing his helmet a little bit more. That's all I'm saying. And I'm interested to see what they do with Cortana. Things I didn't like Reth is a character that's introduced in this to give information on the architect. He is a character, but he's a jackal, and they made him a human. And I was just like, maybe in the budget they just didn't have a way to make the jackal. But if we're gonna go $10 million an episode, I'm sure you can find the money if you're Viacom or Microsoft to make Reth a jackal. I think it kind of takes away the coolness of the character being someone that would work for the Covenant but is helping Chief. I don't know. I don't like the female. I don't like the Covenant using a female character, like a human, I should say, not a female character, but a human woman is what I was trying to say. Yeah, I really didn't like that Chief wasn't in his armor hardly at all in this episode, and I don't really buy that Soren and Chief were friends, quite honestly, because Soren's kind of a shithead. I don't know. I also didn't like I didn't like that they didn't use the score in the first episode. I just think there's some things where I'm like, man, that doesn't feel like Halo. But then there's things I'm like, that does feel like Halo. I'm very mixed about it. I really don't know how I feel about it. I'm interested to see where it goes, and I'm hoping that season 3 or episode 3 on, it really does start to feel like more like Halo. I don't know. A lot of people seem to be hating it, to be honest. And it's already greenlit for season 2, so who knows? Maybe they'll finally hit their stride in the second season. I don't know. Are you excited? Did you watch the first 2 episodes of Halo? Did you like it? Let me know in the comments down below. Do a like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Are you excited for episode 3? Let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and this is going to be posted on Monday, so there's going to be a new episode up, and check out the other stuff, and that's it. Oh man, wait, hold on. I got the thing for this. I can do it. Hold on.
And that's it.